Hey guys, this is Dan, and this is a battle report series that I alluded to in the last couple of videos that I've done regarding a team tournament that was just this past Saturday, April 1st, down in Baltimore, Maryland. This was a cool format. This was a team tournament that was deliberately capped at 16 players and 4 teams, which over 3 games meant that every team that we prepared for, we would ultimately play. Which was just, neat variation on a team tournament format, just turning it into a round robin. And on top of that, they had gone through and taken all of the players or pool of players from the various teams or clubs that were involved and ranked them on a skill level of, I think, just 1 to 3, 1 being new and 3 being very experienced tournament players, and then try to balance out the skill level among the different teams to give everyone a reasonably equal shot of winning. So I just thought it was a cool format, and a great group of guys showed up to play some games. So this list that I'm taking, I like kooky Empire lists, this is a variation on the list that I took to the tournament in December, and I'll pull my list up here. So this is the list. I won't read it out to you guys, but what it is the list that I took in December, but expanded out with more characters and another unit of flagellants. So it's pretty much the same thing, just tons and tons of infantry. The specific goal in mind, this is pretty close to what I would take anyway, I think, just in an all-comers event, but the specific goal in mind for the team event is that I will be the one tanking gunline lists because my 3 teammates all have flying monsters, heroes on flying mounts, so we're trying to keep them away from cannons. So that, again, is the mentality here. It's why specifically I don't have a buff wagon, for examples, because I know, or at least we're planning on putting me up against some cannon lists. And indeed, so here's the first list that I play against. This is against my clubmate and buddy Mark. He's playing his dwarves. He normally plays Kingdom of Aquitaine. He's actually on the task team for the KOE book, but he decided to bring dwarves to this event. And it's a pretty shooty dwarf list. You can see there's 2 big blocks of marksmen with crossbows and handguns. And then another feature is he's got 2 units, this is on the second page now, 2 units of Deep Watch that he spreads his characters out between, which makes for really tough scoring units for capturing objectives, especially when backed up by all that shooting and those 3 war machines. So I was very grateful to see that the catapult specifically is not rune crafted, because that gives it +1 strength and +2 AP. The AP all the time. I am worried about that flame cannon, but we'll see what happens during the game. So the first game, this is post-deployment, and this first game is Frontline Clash, and King of the Hill is the secondary. So you can see that water terrain, that's what it is on the far left on his side of the board. That's a water terrain feature, and that was his choice. And the hill immediately in front of my Imperial Guard there is my choice. So I'm trying to secure the water, he's trying to secure the hill. In any case, the way that I deployed here, I have my unit of flagellants, Stygian Saints over on the far left-hand side. They're the 2 units of militia, Master Wyrd's Mayans up in the front there. I've got the also newly painted unit of De Belial's heavy infantry, just sword and board right next to them there on the bottom left. Green Tide's boys in the middle as the big block of Imperial Guard, have all 3 characters there. So again, I'm just going to shove them forward to try to keep things off of that hill. To the right there, Omar's Band, 2 big blocks of spears. Omar's Band on the left, and then Little Joe's Landsnakes on the right. So those 2 blocks side by side. My plan is to basically run both of those at his King's unit, which I'll get to, is on the right, our right of those handgunners in the woods, but again, I'll go through his deployment here in a second. And then the other unit of flagellants is on the far right-hand side. Those are Fernie's Falksmen. On the far side of the board, so my opponent's side, our left, kind of stage left, if you will, he's got a unit of 25 spears there that I know he's going to try to run up and prevent me from, or I don't know, maybe try to sneak up onto the hill, but prevent me from going after that objective on the left, which all I want to do is push the swordsman into there, but it'll evolve throughout the course of the game. You can kind of barely see it in front of those dice, but his cannon is there pointing at me. It looks like a catapult, but he turned it around, so it kind of looks like a railgun. There's a small unit of Seekers there right in front of that. He's got 1 of his units of Deep Watch to the right, of that, which contains his BSB, Conga of Seekers to the right. His catapult and anvil are both kind of back there behind the Seekers. Big unit of handgunners in the center with the engineer. Flame cannons hiding behind them. I had mentioned the King's unit of Deep Watch to the right there. It's got both the King and the Runic Smith. So there's Deep Watcher AP2 all the time as well. Gyrocopter to the right, and then big unit of crossbows on the right of the gyrocopter. So I also, here's the second shot of my deployment over on the right-hand side. I dropped both units of Rangers on the far side of the table just to plink shots at the crossbows. I figured there's really not much else for them to do. I had hoped to be able to basically have them shoot at that flame cannon all the game, but it's going to be hard for them to get close enough to do that. I'd also made a mistake in deployment. The terrain featured in front of the Rangers I thought was ruins, but it's clearly an impassable, so I'm going to have to kind of fan out around that to get them into position where they can shoot at stuff. I'd also, my opponent got first turn, he dropped for first, and you can kind of see or glance at it that I'm not right up on the line. I'm about 4 inches back, reasoning that he's probably going to move up on his turn, just move up 3 inches with his handgunners, so I will deny him first turn of shooting with that big block of handguns and the flame cannon at least, so only 5 turns to weather, so we'll get right into it. So his turn 1, he moves everything up pretty aggressively, as you can see, which I always like to see because I'm in for a fight. The spearmen on the left move up, both units of Seekers run way up. The one that's kind of touching the hill there had vanguarded. I'd forgotten to mention that. That's why they're up so far. But both units of Deep Watch run up. Gyrocopter moves up. The handguns shuffle forward out of the woods, as does the flame cannon, just trying to get into position there. Magic is a 7-5 face to him, and he gets off revocation, I think. In these early moves, I didn't pay too much attention just because it doesn't really affect anything. In his shooting phase, I'll say preemptively too here that he misfired quite a bit. With 3 machines, he should misfire 3 times over the course of a game, statistically. And I think he misfired like 6 or 7 times, which is always the risk with war machines, but he does misfire quite a bit. So a lot of the damage that was done was actually from his cannon plinking wounds off on the Imperial Guard. But the flame cannon can't shoot this first turn, and the one exception here is that catapult does connect with the spearmen there and knock 3 of them off. Again, I'm very grateful that it's not rune crafted. Would have done a lot more damage. And then some shooting from the crossbows behind that cup there. Just did 1 wound to the flagellants. So here we are on my turn 1. I had mentioned I'm moving the Rangers around that piece of impassable terrain on the right-hand side, and I surge up with everything. The militia are just going to try to shoot those Seekers off because they're going to be a real pain otherwise in being able to chaff my big blocks there. Magic is a small phase, 5-4, and I get off. I tend, with my strategy with alchemy, is I tend to avoid missile spells. I like to go for the debuffs and hexes and the buffs, of course. But just getting low-level castings off, because the whole point of it is I also want to trigger the attribute. That's kind of the whole gimmick here. I've got 2 instances of Glory of Gold, one with the bounce spell, one regular casting, and then I've got Flaming Banners on the Spearmen, and the Prelates both have access to grant flaming attacks in addition to their regular rerolls to wound. So lots of access to rerolls to wound. So I don't typically mess around with missile spells too much, but in this case, I threw a Molten Copper just to knock down some of those handgunners, and I also got off Altered Sight is the hereditary that I chose. So they're at -1 to hit, which will help in the next shooting phase. Militia kill all but 1 of those Seekers, so he's still going to be able to do his job, which is unfortunate, but what can you do? Now we're into his turn 2. So what I'm showing here is he had actually declared a charge on those militia. It wasn't a especially long charge. I think it was like an 8 or a 9 that he needed. And so he failed that charge. My plan was to hold to let them connect, because you can see there, that's a flank. So I was going to let him charge into them, at which point I assumed he wouldn't even pursue, just stay there, and then I could countercharge with the flagellants. But that didn't happen. Predictably, the Seeker moves up to slow down the Imperial Guard. And on the right-hand side, he shuffles forward with his deep watch block a little bit, and the gyrocopter you can see has moved way up to try to chaff both units of spearmen there to at least keep them in place for another turn. Yeah, and this is where things sit at the end of his movement phase. So magic is an 8-5. To him, he got off gleaming, so -1 to hit, or hard target distracting on the left-hand unit of deep watch, and he got off resilience, so -1 to wound on the other unit. Frankly, I was kind of letting these go through. I was more worried about, he had also gotten the movement spell. I think it's on his anvil, if I'm not mistaken, or somebody has it. So I was kind of saving my dice for that, because I'm not going to even shoot at these two units. I'm certainly not going to engage them until it's my turn to charge. And anyway, I'm not going to do it next turn. So I figured I'll let these go off. So that's where things sit at the end of the magic phase. Shooting phase, yeah, I kind of angle the picture toward whatever is shooting at the unit that's taking damage. So in this case, again, the cannon does 4 wounds to the Imperial Guard. And I think there was no other damage in the shooting phase because, well, I guess maybe the crossbows here are about to, I think there was no other damage in the shooting phase because the 2 other war machines misfired. The handguns are at -1 to hit, so they might have done like a wound or 2. And I can't remember why the crossbows didn't do any damage to those flagellants. Maybe they just missed. Whatever the case is, we're now into my turn too. So what happens here, I had declared a charge with Omar's boys into the gyrocopter, and you can see them connecting the front there. The other unit of spearmen tried charging into the flank, but where the flagellants were prevented them from finishing the wheel. They couldn't close the door, so they kind of failed charged in this kind of awkward way. The flagellants then move way up. And on the left-hand side, I move up with the militia in front of Stygian's saints, and they're just going to throw some shots at them and then flee when they inevitably charge. The other unit of militia move up to chaff the unit of deep watch in the center, and then the Imperial Guard do charge into that remaining seeker to just finish him off. Magic is a 7-5, and I think was just totally ineffectual because we're right into the shooting phase. So 2 shots, knock off some, or I should say 2 spearmen get knocked off there. And in combat, we do kill that seeker, but he kills 2, including the champion of the Imperial Guard, so that's unfortunate. Let me back up a couple of slides here. So the gyrocopter, you can see the combat that I'm in, that if I kill the gyrocopter, that I think it was like a 10 is what I needed on my overrun to connect with the front of the deep watch, kind of to the upper right-hand side, his king's unit of deep watch. And that is what happens. So the overrun takes them into the deep watch unit, which is perfect because that's going to lock them down. Even though I'm not going to win that combat unassisted, there's enough bodies in there that they can hold that unit down for at least into my next turn, where I am very well positioned with both the flagellants and the other unit of spearmen to flank charge that unit. And that's one that does not have old stone, so they should be able to do some real work if I can get into the flank there. So yeah, we're into his turn 3 now, and seeing this, he marches up with his crossbows to chaff the flagellants, so they can't flank charge into that deep watch unit. And he does charge into the militia on the left-hand side, so I flee, and then he redirects into the flagellants. And that's it for his chart. No, his BSP, you can see in the flank, they're kind of in the upper right-hand portion of the screen. He charges in with his BSP into the flank, because his goal now is to do as much damage to that unit as possible to try to break steadfast, and he has the runes of lightning on the BSP as well as the rune of dragon's breath, so he's going to try to kill as many as he can, try to break the unit. And he gets rune of oaths off, because again, he's trying to do damage right now. He's not worried about incoming attacks, so he gets that off. And in the shooting phase, plinks some more wounds off of the Imperial Guard, and a lot more wounds off the Imperial Guard. I think, yeah, they get pretty combat ineffective. So this is now the 3rd salvo, one from the handgunners, one from the flame cannon, I think from the catapult, and now from the cannon. So the Imperial Guard are getting pretty close to combat ineffective. But in the combat phase, the flagellants take, I think, yeah, it looks like just 5 wounds, but they do some pretty good damage to the spearmen because they've got hatred and battle focus in the first round of combat, which is a really nasty combination. But the spearmen do hold. And then, yeah, you can see he did a ton of wounds to these spearmen, and I do just a handful back to him. He actually forgot to pop Rune of Dragon's Breath in this round, so that was just from attacks from the King, the Deep Watch, and the BSB with Runes of Lightning. So good news is it's not enough damage to break Steadfast, so they're going to hold there for one more turn. And now we're into my turn 3. So the Imperial Guard charge into the kind of the skirmishing unit of Seekers there to clean up those points. And the militia are perfectly happy to just sit there chaffing those Deep Watch and shooting at them every turn, so that's where they're going to sit. And then, yeah, the flagellants do charge into the crossbows because they were chaffed, and then the other spear block is just able to squeeze in there and charge into the flank of the Deep Watch, so that's great news for me. And then a pretty good magic phase into a 8-6, it looks like. And I'm able to get off rerolls to wound on the flagellants on the left-hand side, which will help a lot. And then this was great. I was able to get through Corruption of 10, so permanent -1 armor on the Deep Watch, and it triggers the attribute, which means that I can pop both flaming standards on those spearmen and get rerolls to wound. So we should be able to do some decent damage. In the combat phase, the flagellants run off the crossbows but don't catch them. And on the left-hand side, the spearmen are hanging on by a thread. They still hold, though. And then, yeah, so he did pop Rune of Dragon's Breath in this round, and you can see he did a ton more damage to the spearmen in the front. But I do pretty good wounds back to him. I think I do like 7 wounds. Yeah, it looks like 7 wounds to the unit of Deep Watch. So he's running out of bodies there, which is, again, great news for me. So here we are into his turn 4 now. So he's charging in with the Deep Watch finally into that unit of militia. And he does rally with the crossbows. And he gets off, oh man, so Dwarven Magic, normally you can rely on getting 1 spell off a turn, because with bound spells, you're basically just going dice for dice with your opponent, and then however many dice you're up is the spell you get off, is kind of how it works. But he did manage to get 2 spells off in this magic phase, which hurts because it was both Gleaming and Resilience, which means that even with rerolls to wound up, I'm going to have a real hard time doing damage to that unit. And I had mentioned all the misfiring that happened. The flame cannon misfires for a second time. But the cannon's still putting in work on the Imperial Guard in his shooting phase, and the handguns do a couple more. And then into combat. So the spearmen are down to 1 guy at the end of this combat. I've still got rerolls to wound up. But they do break and run, and the flagellants chase them and catch them. So clean those points up. And then, yeah, this was a surprise. So the Deep Watch, you can see there's only a couple of files in. There's 3 files in contact there. But they only do 3 wounds to the militia, who then hold. I think they needed a 4 or a 5, and they rolled it. So that's great. And then in this combat, they are tearing through what is left of these spearmen. I had mentioned I'm really going to struggle to wound them. It looks like I did 2 more wounds, even with all my buffs up, because he also has -1 to hit and -1 to wound up. But yeah, they all but finish off that unit of spearmen there. But I think they do hold. Yeah, they do hold. And then we're now into my turn 4. So I charge in with the heavy infantry. And then I was feeling kind of aggressive at this point. I felt like things were starting to swing my way, and I tend to get overzealous, I think. So I wanted to break that unit of Deep Watch in 1 round. So I figured if I charged in with the heavy infantry and I charged the flank with the BSB, which is, you see the 1 model sticking off on the side there, then I'm bringing in 3 ranks from the charge. I'm going to bring in a flank and a BSB. So if I just do a couple of wounds, my hope is that I'm going to be able to break them, because they're not stubborn. There's no character in that unit. So that's the thought process anyway. We'll see what happens. And the flagellants charge into the crossbow that had rallied the previous turn, and I also charge into the flank with the rangers, not because they needed the help in combat, but because my hope is that if just a handful of guys hang on in that crossbow unit, they'll break, and I can push them to the left. So the flagellants, instead of overrunning straight forward, will be able to chase them to the left and into the flank of those handguns and start rolling up his back line. Into Magic, we're at 6/5. And I'm able to get off Exemplar Flame, so just the bounce spell version of Glory of Gold, to grant +1 AP and flaming attacks to the heavy infantry, which also triggers the attribute. So now I get rerolls to wound against the Deep Watch with them. And in combat, yeah, that's exactly what happens. There was 1 or 2 crossbows remaining. They broke and ran. I pushed them to the left, chased with everybody, and ran them down. And now the flagellants are in the flank of those handguns. So it's looking pretty great on the back line. And the 3 remaining spearmen, unsurprisingly, do die. And the Deep Watch turn to face the Landsknechts. And in this combat, you can see I do 4 wounds there, but it was not enough to break him because he does, I think, 5 wounds to the militia, 1 to the heavy infantry. So I'm already down 2 on wounds, and I only have 2 ranks, and then a flank into BSB. He was only down by 2 or 3, and he passes his leadership 7 rerollable check. So now the BSB is kind of stuck there on the side, and his BSB is free to countercharge because he's no longer engaged with the spearmen. And that's what he does. We're into his turn 5, so he charges the flank on my BSB. And in the magic phase, he gets off Rune of, I think it's Resilience there for -1 to wound on the Deep Watch. And then in combat, yeah, the flagellants had charged the flank on this handgunner, so they break them. Handgunners run, so I caught them. They had the engineer as well, and then they run into the flame cannon and angle in such a way that he's going to now try to, they are now going to try to run up the catapult and the anvil. So that's, again, looking great on the back line. The militia are killed to a man, I think. They're all dead. And then the heavy infantry just take a couple more wounds. But unfortunately, he was able to kill off my BSB. So that was a big mistake on my part. There was no reason for me to charge him out of the unit there. Again, my hope is that I was able to wipe the unit out in 1 round, and just like the trick with the flagellants, I could have pushed them to the left and then chased with everything, including those heavy infantry, to run them into his water feature there to claim that objective. But there was no reason to do that because I have the flagellants now. You can see them peeking out there on the left-hand side, ready to charge into the flank anyway. So I didn't need to break them in 1 turn. I should have been patient. But instead, I gave up 450 points. So live and learn. And the other consequence here, this is kind of where 17 to 20 point victories are lost, are with mistakes like that, because what happened is the spearmen lost combat with the Deep Watch, and even with Discipline 10, Steadfast, you occasionally roll up 11s and 12s, which is what the BSB is for, but the BSB was gone, so I rolled an 11, they break and ran, and fortunately he didn't pursue me because he's now trying to get up onto that hill to contest objective or take objective, and if he chases after the spearman, he won't have time to do that. So he lets him run so he can turn to face and then try to run up there in his last turn. And so my turn 5, the flagellants charge the flank on the Deep Watch. And the spearmen do rally. And this is kind of where things sit at the end of the movement phase. Big magic phase in a 9 to 7. I'm able to get off just a small word of iron. Again, the thought process was I wanted to trigger the attribute, and then I don't know, I was trying to get off flaming attacks on the flagellants or Glory of Gold. So anyway, it ends up nothing else happening with the flaming attacks. It was just +1 armor on the heavy infantry. Yep, and shooting plinks off a couple wounds off the Deep Watch. They're now down to just 2 models, because 2 of the models are the King and the Runesmith. And the flagellants do kill the flame cannon and overrun into the catapult. And in combat, because he's got -1 to wound up, I don't do as much damage as I was hoping with those flagellants in the flank. Not to mention that I've only got 4 files in there, but still. And we're into his turn 6. So he actually tries to charge into the flank of the heavy infantry. I think he was reasoning because he couldn't march up onto the hill. He would have needed the magic boost movement to get onto the hill. But if he can declare that charge and get into the flank of the heavy infantry, he would have had just part of his unit on the hill. So he declares a charge and fails it. And then we're into magic phase, 8-5. And then once again, he's able to double buff this unit, which maybe I'm playing dwarves wrong. I'm used to only getting one spell off a turn. If I'm lucky, then like one turn a game I'll get 2 off. But he's had a couple of 2 spell phases, which makes up for, at least helps make up for the misfires. But it means that I'm not hurting him in combat. And the flagellants kill off the catapult. And then, in combat, we do, looks like 4 wounds to those Deep Watch. They've got just 6 models left. But everybody stays just where they are. And then we're into my turn 6. Flagellants charge into the anvil in the back. Spearmen charge into the flank on that King's unit. So my hope here is that if I can kill just 2 models on that Deep Watch, I'm bringing in a ton of static combat res. And maybe I'll be able to break and run down the general's unit. And nope, I'm out of pictures. That's not what happens. What ends up happening is I kill the anvil. I do not kill the cannon. I think I kill all but like 2 of those Deep Watch that hold, and I think I get them down to 1 model in that unit of Deep Watch with the king and the runic smith. So in the end, everything you see here on the board is what's left on the board, and it ends up being a victory to me of 14-6. So a hard-fought, bloody game. Some bad luck on my opponent's part, some poor play on my part, and but still overall very enjoyable game and a solid first game result. So I'll take that. And now we're into game 2. So this is refused flank and hold the center is the secondary objective. This was against a demon player, and a demon player, I should say. It's Billiam Dollars. And a wonderful guy. I'll actually talk about that at the end, but this is a super, super fun game, and in part because I have no idea what demons do to begin with, but he's got a really cool looking army that has a lot of conversions that I really enjoyed, but it made it difficult to kind of figure out what some of this stuff was in game, and I felt myself just kind of not caring about that and just charging whatever was in front of me. So anyway, it was a very fun game. I'll foreshadow it that way. But I also dropped for first, which I almost never do. I prefer taking second turn, being able to counter deploy against my opponent, and having the very last turn of the game or player turn of the game. But in this case, I dropped for first, reasoning that he doesn't have a lot of shooting, and I wanted to basically put pressure on the center to then put him in a position where he was thinking about moving up on my kind of entrenched line on the center there. So that was the reasoning. I kind of went with my standard fan out deployment here with the Imperial Guard, heavy infantry next to each other, militia in the middle, spears flanking them, and then flagellants flanking those, and then rangers on the far outside. So I'll tell you, on his list from right to left, I'm just going to make up names or describe them because I genuinely do not have very much experience against Demon Legions, but he's got the chariot with the gun on the far right-hand side. He's got I think they're lemures. We were calling them lemurs all throughout the game, with his general and caster in the front of that unit. They're in like a 3-wide formation. A much bigger unit of lemures with another gun chariot war platform guy inside of that unit. A unit of flying things behind them, a unit of myrmidons, I know those, in the woods there, and a unit of hoarders to the left of them, and another flying unit of guys behind them, and then blowflies, 3 blowflies. See, I got those 2 to the left of the woods, and then the not Slanesh guys off on the far, far left-hand side, kind of trying to decide what they want to do. But we'll see how things go. I march up with everything. I got first turn, so I just run at them. Magic is a 7-5, and I end up taking, I think I take Lash in this game, so I was trying to hit him, and I think I do 1 or 2 wounds, and then the Rangers shoot at him, and they're beasts, actually, so I end up getting a couple of lucky lethal strikes. So I put a few wounds, actually, in my first turn on the gun chariot on the right-hand side. And yeah, I had got an altered sight off of one of the militia. So between all that shooting, it looks like he counts down with his wounds. So there are 2 wounds remaining on gun chariot number 1. And then we're into his turn 1. So he shuffles forward a little bit because I moving up really aggressively. He even mentioned a couple of times, like, I don't know what to do against all of these models. So he was playing it safe for the first couple of turns while he tried to test out the waters a little bit. So he's kind of repositioning some things. On the right-hand side, he moves the flyers forward to challenge the rangers, and he stays still with both of the gun chariots because he's going to shoot. And in his magic phase, he gets off, I can stop it, he gets off Whispers of the Veil, so -1 res and discipline on Little Joe's unit, and just blasts them between the normal shots out of those guys and the extra shots from Veil tokens. Yeah, I mean, the unit is cut in half between those 2 chariots. I didn't expect that. So not charging any demons with a unit of like 24 spearmen. So yeah, that's where they sit at the end of the shooting phase. Oof. And actually, now I think we're into my turn 2. So moving forward with the other units, the spearmen are staying back a little bit now. But you can see I'm just moving everything as far forward as possible. Into magic now, we're in an 8-5. And I throw Altered Sight on the rangers this time. Trying to, again, I just need to do 2 more wounds to that chariot, and I was feeling pretty lucky after the first round of shooting. And yeah, that's where things sit. I get him down to 1 wound with, I think, all of my shooting that could shoot at it, shot at it. And granted, needing like 4s and 5s to hits, I guess 3s or 4s on the rangers, and then 6s to wound, but 6s are lethal strike on them. But I wasn't able to essentially do just a wound over there. And then we're into his turn 2. So he tries to actually charge him with both the Blowed Flies and the Myrmidons, which is a good move, trying to tackle that spearman block. That's the best way to do it. It's just throw everything at 1 unit. But the Myrmidons fail their charge, so the Blowed Flies go in solo. And then he has an ambushing unit of things. So they ambush thusly. And he had charged actually with the flying unit in the upper right against the rangers. So they're in combat now as well. And then magic is a big magic phase, as most demon magic phases are. So it's a 10-7. And he gets off something. The Blue Flies that makes them hard to hurt. I know that the spearmen aren't going to be able to cut through them anyway. And my hope is that they hold and they can then flank charge with the flagellants. And yeah, these poor spearmen just continuing to get shot at. He does redirect the other one into shooting at the flagellants for a change, which is better for me because they can, with their res 4, can tank some more of those shots. The rangers, unsurprisingly, losing combat to the strength 6 attacks of those flyers. And the blowflies, only do a couple of wounds. I guess it's not surprising for blowflies. That's not really what they do. And I think, we do 1 wound to the blowflies with the spearmen. But critically, in my next turn, I charge into the flank with the flagellants. And then move up really aggressively here. So I charged in with both the spearmen and the flagellants into the ambushing guys, because what that allowed me to do by maximizing models, I could push the flagellants all the way out to the flank so that on their overrun they could potentially run into gun chariot number 1 with 1 wound. So that's where things sit after my movement phase. In my magic phase, I'm able to get off rerolls to wound on the flagellants. So they're going to have hatred, battle focus, and rerolls to wound against these blowflies. So that's the best chance I've got to damage them, I think. And some shots at the Myrmidons. Just take off a couple of wounds there. And tons and tons of damage all around, mostly to myself because of blowfly toxic rules. But we finish off the blowflies and get ready for the charge from the Hoarders and the Myrmidons. And then over here, oh man, the flagellants were just 1 inch away from, it was actually like half of a centimeter, but it was not in contact, so they were not able to successfully overrun into the chariot. And then in his turn, this would be his turn 3, he charges with both the Myrmidons and the hoarders into the flagellants, and then flies back behind my line here with the flying guys. Yeah, this is just some repositioning. And then those guys, whatever they're called, move up into the woods, into magic. And he's able to get off Whispers of the Veil onto the flagellants. I think I actually let this through because I figured that, well, it didn't actually matter how much damage he does to me, because I know that I'm going to do just an absolute tsunami of damage to him. So I was more worried about other things at the time, I suppose. And the shooting phase, yeah, he knocks off 3 or 4 more flagellants. And yeah, look at this, guys. Predictably, he's hitting me on 3s, wounding me on 2s with those Myrmidons, but I get all of my attacks back with Hatred, Battle Focus, and rerolls to wound are still up. So those Myrmidons get taken down from like 20-something models to 4. So we just absolutely obliterate each other. And then in my turn, I had charged into the flank. He had moved up to chaff with the flying guys next to the Myrmidons there to stop the spearmen. But I ended up charging him with everything. So the militia charge, heavy infantry charge, and the spearman charge flank of that unit. And then up in the upper right, the damaged unit of spearmen reform into a tighter formation, and the flagellants do charge into the gun chariot. And I get off Gloria Gold, so flaming attacks +1 AP, and magical attacks, really critically it's for the flaming attacks because I threw the attribute on the Myrmidons, so I still have rerolls to wound up even though I don't have hatred, and I do still have battle focus but no hatred. And then I do the same trick over here, so I get Gloria Gold off on the flagellants, but I throw the attribute on the lemures with the hope that I'll be able to kill this chariot in 1 round of combat and overrun into them. So I'm actually teeing up the next round of combat. That's the thought process there. Yeah, and that's what happens. So they kill the chariot, overrun into the lemures. And we kill I want to call them harpies, but I know they're not. Gargoyles. I can't remember what the flying demons are called. Kill them off in the center and kind of pivot like that. And then in combat, yeah, the flagellants finish off the last, and the Myrmidons take just a couple of wounds in return. So now we're in combat just with the hoarders, is how things sit at the end of that combat. So into his turn, now he's going to be more aggressive because he's got to make up for some of this damage he's been taking. So he charges the flank, the Imperial Guard, with both of his units there. And only a small magic phase, not a good time for that. 5/4, he gets off, can't even read it, don't know what that is. Gets off something on the big unit of lemures there. I think it was, might have been Stars Align for shooting, because he's still trying to shoot at the spearman unit too, because there's really no other good targets. The militia there, but they've got hard target. So yeah, he's trying to get them down below 25%, so he cleans those points up. I think he did it with that round of shooting. And then in combat, yeah, they again had hatred, battle focus, and rerolls to wound up on flagellants, as we've now seen multiple times in this game, is a horrendous combination. So they, even with Res 5, tear through a bunch of lemures, and there's, as I said, they were only 3 wide, so there's pretty much no one left in that unit other than the caster. And they only take a couple of wounds back in return. Yeah, everything was strength 6 here coming in at me, or at least AP 3, so they were carving through Imperial Guard left and right, and I only do a couple of wounds back, but I hold. And then in the Hoarder combat, I'm running out of flagellants, but they're doing their job. They killed off that big unit of Myrmidons and are whittling down these Hoarders. Again, he counts it down, so there's 1 wound left on the model that's kind of in the back there. I guess they're 40 by 40. I'm not actually sure. This was like a kind of crazy cross charge that I was able to pull off here. Let me see if I can go back to get a good shot of where things were positioned. I guess I can't, but you can kind of see in the lower left-hand side there, the heavy infantry are facing the flank of the Hoarders, where the Hoarders and the flagellant combat is. And then the spearmen, you can see if those heavy infantry move out of the way, we'll be able to rear charge the unit of Crutox, whatever those are. Beautiful conversions. I don't know the names of demon stuff. But that's what happens. They both kind of charge past each other into their respective units. And I keep running away with the spearmen there, pretending I'm trying to secure an objective down there, but they're just running away. And in the magic phase, I'm able to get off a small word of iron on the Imperial Guard. Actually, it was a big word of iron because I had the dice for it, so I did big word of iron, but mostly, again, for the attribute. So now the spearmen who have not popped their flaming banner yet are going to have rerolls to wound against the not Slanesh guys. And in combat, yeah, we'll down to one flagellant, and he loses another hoarder. Loses two hoarders. That's where things sit at the end of the combat, but he does not explode. And in this flagellant combat in the top right, I think, finish the unit off. And he's got a guy up there with, I think, just a couple of wounds on him. I think he has 5 to start, maybe he has 3 left right now. And yeah, this is where things sit at the end of that combat in the center, because we're able to do enough damage to the one unit that we pop the other unit through combat res as well. So that's where things sit. And actually, I should say, I think I skipped a phase there, because now we're into my next magic phase. Yeah. Now we're into my opponent's magic phase. Yeah, this is his turn. That's why I skipped movement, because there's not much for him to move. So this is his turn, his magic phase, and he gets off something. Something back there. And in the end of the combat phase, then he's got little shooting, or at least he's moving, so his shooting's at -1. The flagellants finish off the caster on the upper right-hand side and turn to face that unit, the kind of only major remaining unit. And at the end of the combat phase, he's now the only unit on the board, because the hoarders pop. He does kill off the unit of flagellants, so there's just a prelate standing on his own there. But now we're into this crazy charge. So everything charges this big unit. And the support unit actually was able to pull off a support charge as well. So I'm able to count their ranks on it, in addition to the 3 ranks being brought in by the spearmen. So I'm coming in with just an insane amount of static combat res. I think it's, charge, flank, big flank, 2 ranks from the support unit, 3 ranks from the unit of spearmen, 2 banners, and then a BS base. So that's 11 static combat res charging into this unit, where I'm also going to have a lot of damage being dealt and a huge magic phase on top of this. So I'm able to get off. All I really needed was a small word of iron to get off flaming attacks. I think reasoning that, well, maybe I wasn't going for flaming attacks at this point. I think he was maybe able to stop both Glories of Gold, because I don't have flaming attacks at this point with anything, so I don't know what I was thinking there, but I do, a ton of damage. There's no other pictures, because this is pretty much how the game ends, so I am able to pop everything, and it ends up being a 20-0 to me, because I had secured the center of the board for a couple of turns, so I got objective as well. So an absolutely brutal game. I gotta say, though, that my opponent, Billy, $1 billion, this is no shade on anybody else I've ever played, because certainly I had a great time in the other games even that I played in this event. And I just wanted to say that this was probably the most enjoyable game of the 9th Age I think that I've ever played. And it's easy for me to say when things were kind of going my way the entire game, but it really was Billy. I just felt super relaxed. He was taking everything in stride. It was just an absolute delight to play against, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for that, Billy. And then the last game, I played against Phil Carl and his, I guess all-mounted, you can call it all-mounted, but there's 3 giants. This is the one list I had as a red matchup. I did not want to play against this list. He's got 3 big fan of Sunna giants, and didn't want to play against it, because I really don't have any shooting to handle those 3 giants. And I know that if I get in combat with them, I have to trade points. Like, whatever I get in combat with, if I'm going to kill a giant, I'm going to be taking a ton of damage back, because even if you kill them outright, they're coming back with, 13 attacks, and they're thunder stomps. So it's just not, I don't like that. I do like the knight side of it. And we were joking, or like, I think on the lunch break, we were just chatting, And we were both saying that we don't want to play against each other's lists, so I'm not sure how this ended up happening, but we're playing against each other. And this last one is it Dawn Assault? It's the one that my list does not like, because it cuts off a whole section of the board, which is the right-hand side. And Spoils of War was the secondary objective. So I'll throw his list up here in a second. But he ends up taking first turn. He moves forward with everything. And I guess let me explain what his army is. It's very cool conversions, but it does make it tricky to figure out what some of this stuff is. My army is, again, in my kind of typical fan-out formation. Heavy infantry on the far left are going to try to go pick up that marker on the left. I've got a unit of flagellants, 2 units of militia in front of the 2 units of spearmen. Everything's kind of back a little bit because I know that he's going to come right at me and I'm going to have to do my best to pick combats. Imperial Guard are in the woods there, and other unit of flagellants to the right of them. On his side, he's got, let me see if I can zoom in here. I can zoom in here. So he's got demigryphs on, again, stage left there. He's got 1 giant to the right of them, big unit of knightly orders to the right of them with 2 characters, the BSB and the knight commander with the lightsaber. He's got the big robot chicken there is the war altar. Another giant to the right of them, Electro Cav to the right with the wizard in the front, another giant to the right of them, and another unit of 4 demigryphs. So kind of a symmetrical list that way, and that's how he's deployed. So his first turn, he runs at me with everything and gets a 7-5 phase. He doesn't always throw cards down, so it was hard to keep track of what some of these spells were, but he pretty consistently either bubbled, scrying, or Stars Align for rerolls. So that's, especially in these opening turns, that's what's typically happening. So we're right in my turn 1 because there was no shooting on his side either. So I move forward with everything. You can see I've moved the militia way up, and my plan, I think, is just to flee with them. I had debated like holding and taking some of these charges and then hoping he doesn't roll super well in his overrun, then I can kind of dictate which charges I'm going to pick. But it's just as easy for me to flee with these militia because they don't cause panic in the parent unit blocks. And those are slightly long charges for him to connect with those spear blocks. So that's the thought process. I think I'm going to flee with these and leave him kind of stranded there for me to countercharge. And then, nothing happened there. So I did make one major mistake in retrospect in this game, and that was at spell selections. I was so scared of these giants and wanting to do damage to the giants before they got into combat with me that I picked 3 missile spells. So I picked all 3. I picked Molten Copper, I picked Silver Spike, and I picked Lash. And the problem with that, of course, is that once I'm in combat, which happens very quickly with this list, I've got 3 spells that are essentially useless to me. And that was just, again, I was so scared of these giants that I did the opposite of what I normally do, which is I ignored the missile spells completely to buff my units in combat. So I'll say that was a big mistake on my part. So in these opening magic phases, shooting phases, I'm plinking a wound here and there, but I'm really not doing any serious damage. And now we're into his turn 2. So he charges. I had chaffed him on the right-hand side with those rangers. So he charges in like that. And on the left-hand side, he charges in with his demigryphs into Fernie's Falxman. So he was rightfully scared after seeing what these flagellants were able to do against those demon legions. I now have a healthy respect for the prelate flagellant combo. Phil Carl, being a very experienced player, knew that without even having to see it in action. So he actually dedicated 2 demis worth of attacks into the prelate to try to kill him before hatreds could kick in. And you can see he's got double buffs on them right now between Scrying and Stars Align. So he kills off the prelate and is able to do, I was counting with dice there, it looks like 7 wounds, and I'm able to kill off a demi in response. So I then pull off the flagellants at the end of the combat phase. And so now we're into my next turn. He had moved up to chaff. Well, a couple of things here. Let me, explain from right to left. So on the right-hand side, the demis killed the rangers, overran into the flagellants. The giant, he had moved up in his last turn to chaff the Imperial Guard. I then charged with the Imperial Guard. The spearman, I charged into his knightly orders, but he had positioned the giants in such a way, they both have a support unit. So it didn't matter which side I picked, he was going to be able to countercharge with the giant, so that's what he does there. And I tried charging in again. These poor spearmen can never seem to charge anything in the flank because they're so large. I tried charging in with the spearmen on the flank of the demis, but wasn't able to close the door from where their initial position was. So they're not able to do that. The militia from fleeing last turn both rally, and the support unit up on the far left goes up to claim that objective. And yeah, we're straight into combat because, again, magic's kind of ineffectual because at this point I've really just got Glory of Gold, I've got Bound Glory of Gold, and then I've got my Prelate Bound spells in the other unit that isn't dead yet, which is a shame, again, because Corruption of Tin would have been a fantastic spell to be chucking every single turn on that Knightly Order Death Star. So I don't know what I was thinking at spell selection. I just kind of panicked. But on the left-hand side here, it's a war of attrition, and the flagellants are winning, so the demis are almost gone. On the left-hand side, we take a ton of damage in return. I do get up a 5 of Aegis on the unit on the right-hand side, hoping, because I know he's going to do the same trick where he's going to dump all of his attacks that he can into the Prelate to try to kill him. But if I can keep him alive, I saw how much damage the flagellants were able to do on the left without a Prelate. So with a Prelate, the hope with Hatred and Battle Focus, I'm going to be able to evaporate these demis. However, even with 5 of Aegis up, you can see my Prelate there with the shield. It's one of Jurgis Yam's Vikings. I used 2 of those models for my Prelate models in this game. Died anyway, so unfortunate. But it does mean that the unit doesn't take nearly as much damage, and I still killed 2 demis in return. Which is great, because that unit is holding an objective right now. So if I can get him to drop it, that would be excellent. Yeah, really the best case scenario, actually, with these giants is having him charge a great weapon unit or charging with a great weapon unit, because he does his regular attacks first, and then I kill him outright with a great weapon unit. And he still does his thunder stomps, but it's better to have him attack first so he's not getting killed and then attacking with like 13 attacks. So he only had 5 attacks plus his thunder stomp. So Imperial Guard waste one of the giants. I'll take that. And ooh, yeah, these spearmen, it seems like every single game they get killed close to a man. So this opening combat with the spearmen did not go great. But it's okay, they're steadfast. And yeah, that's where things sit at the end of that combat. So we're now into his next turn. So he charges in with the giant into the other unit of spearmen, trying to lock them down. He does the same thing with his gigantic war altar, charges into the Imperial Guard, just knowing that it's a 2-up armor, stubborn 4-up Aegis unit, so it's going to lock them down for probably a couple of turns. In his magic phase, he, as I mentioned, I don't always document it, but he's usually bubbling either scrying or stars align is where we sit. So on the left, the flagellants are able to finish off the demis, which is great because now they're in position to flank charge that giant in my next turn. Over on the right, he had charged in with the Electro Cav as well. I'm not able to kill off the demis. The demis are down to 1 model with, I think, 2 wounds remaining. They're really close for me to kill off that unit and at least get him to drop the objective, even if I can't pick it up on the right-hand side right now. But those Electro Cav are going to make that more difficult task. So, but everything stays as it is. On the right-hand side, he had charged in. I had a couple of choices to make here because he issued a challenge with his Prelate, as you would expect, and I actually declined, and he chose my general as the one to hide. And there's some nuances to this that we talked about in the upcoming phases. He was very polite that way and pointing out kind of the ramifications of some of my choices when it comes to refusing challenges multiple times. But I knew that if I refused my general, nobody's going to get his Discipline 10 bubble. But I thought with all of the attacks coming in, because I had the Fight Extra Rank order up, and at that point they were 8 wide, I thought, you know what, I'm going to be able to dump like 16 attacks with great weapons into this guy. And my hope is I would just be able to kill him outright, and then my general hiding wouldn't matter. But that's not what happened. I'm able to do, I think, a couple of wounds, but he does a bunch of wounds back to me. I then reform thusly at the end of the combat. The spearmen in the center, yeah, they just could not hold on to a giant and a giant knightly order boss. You can see what he did here. This is, I have no, again, not the fault of my opponent. He's a very good player and was very helpful all throughout the game in pointing out some of my lapses in rules knowledge. But you can see the giant had started out on the right-hand side. This is a perfectly legal reform, post-combat reform, and all I did was he hopped to the other side so that he can then charge the spearman in his next turn. I kind of rate this along with, you know, kind of the crazy 45-degree wheels you can do against war machines to angle up cascading charges. But it's breaks immersion for me. But again, it's not a criticism of my opponent in any way. It's just of kind of rules, idiosyncrasies that I find in the game. But I pointed that out because the giant that started on the right-hand side is able to charge into the spearman on the left-hand side, because in the prior turn they had reformed onto the other side of the unit. And as I said, the spearmen break and run. And then in combat, because he did it in the correct order, the giant's able to fight a second time against this other unit of spearmen and do a ton of damage to them. And now we're into my next turn. So the spearmen do not rally. They're decimated, and the general is hiding because he refused the challenge, which also means that the militia are on their own discipline. So even with the reroll from the BSB, they break and run as well. So those units are both off the table now. And I am able to get Glory of Gold off on the Flagellants. So they're going to be rerolling to wound against the Electro Cav is where I threw the attribute. I charge in with the Rangers in the flank, not because I think they're going to do any damage, but because I'm just trying to break these units. And I figure between the damage that I'm doing and then a charge flank for some extra static res, it can't hurt, right? So that's where I'm at. But that's not what happens. I lose combat. They do, it looks like 8 more wounds to me. And the Rangers then break because they're on their own discipline, as I had mentioned before. I do quite a bit of wounds to the Electro Cav, though. They're down to, I think they were starting off at 12 models, and they're down to 7 or 8 right now. So we're getting through it. We're trading damage pretty readily here, but it's not really translating into field position. And I do end up accepting the challenge with my general because I don't really have a choice at this point. I can keep refusing challenges and trying to do damage with my Imperial Guard, but I'm losing character benefits each phase that I do this. So I accept with my general, and now it's a pillow fight because I'm not built for combat, and the locket's in play too, so I only have 2 attacks. So we're just going to sit there, and he's going to keep taking minimized stubborn checks. The Flagellants had charging on the left. Into the giants combat now. And this is the end of the combat where the Flagellants had actually charged in to the flank of that giant and have just been taking a bunch of wounds in the process. But they had reformed kind of like that at the end of that combat with the spearmen, again, now down to less than half strength against those 2 giants. And same thing over here. I'm doing a ton of damage. You can see those Electro Cav are down to just 4 models. If I do 1 more, they're going to be at under 25%, so I'll get half points for them. And that Demigriff's on 1 wound as well, so I'm doing as much as I can in terms of damage. It's just not enough, unfortunately. And yeah, what ends up happening here, this is now the end of his next turn. Because what happens is he had charged in with the knightly orders in the center and to support his war altar against the Imperial Guard. I do kill off 1 of those giants, lose 5 Flagellants in return, and the spearmen break and run. This is the end of his next phase. I got kind of fast with taking pictures at the end here. So I've got 5 Flagellants left there. My turn will be next is where we sit. And yeah, at the end of that combat phase, that's where the knightly order block sits. And I reform like this to try to get those great weapon attacks in against the knightly orders. Again, I'm just trying to pick up points at this point, trying to do as much damage as I possibly can because I'm losing men left and right here. The Rangers, unfortunately, do not rally even on a rerollable 10, but they only flee a couple. I think I rolled the 2 that I needed for their movement, so they just shuffle forward a little bit. And I don't charge the flagellants, I just move them forward to within 1 inch of the giant there. Because the giant, you can't see it, but there's a dice on the other side. He's down to like 4 wounds. So I want to move up with the militia first to throw some pistol shots into him. Magic. I don't get anything off, or anything of substance anyway. Because now we're already scooting ahead to the end of the combat phase. So the flagellants die off. I put all 3 attacks into that demi to try to kill it, and I'm not able to kill it. You can see he's only got 1 wound left. So that's unfortunate. And then over here, I should say I did get 1 spell off. I got off Exemplar's Flame and then got rerolls to wound against the Knightly Orders, which is great. So they're AP4 and rerolling to wound. And you can see I killed a ton of Knightly Orders in the process, and but it's just not enough. So yeah, I only take, it looks like 4 wounds in return, but he's doing some damage to my characters as well. But combat's pushed, that's where we sit. And then in his following turn, he charges flank with the Electro Cav because he's trying to just finish this unit off, clean those points up. Who can blame him? He charges into the Flagellants with the Giant. And small magic phase for him, 5/4. As I mentioned, typically now what he's doing, I think what he actually gets off this phase is bubble 5-up Aegis off of the altar. So now the Electro Cav, his Knightly Orders, I guess the altar already had a 4-up Aegis, but the Knightly Orders and the Electro Cav all now have a 5-up Aegis. And this was cool. The Flagellants and the Giant, I guess it's kind of poetic that way, that they both have the same rule where they're removed last, and the Flagellants, in my case, strike last, but they actually end up killing each other with all of their remaining attacks. So the militia sit kind of perplexed as everything dies on the left-hand side. And in combat, I'm just running out of guys. There's not much for me to do at this point. I'm not doing enough damage. Again, with those 5-up Aegis up, he's able to tank a lot of the damage that I'm doing, even with rerolls to wound up. So he's still got, I think he's got 2 Knightly Orders left in that unit, and then he's got the 2 characters up in the front as well. So it's just not enough. And the demi, you can see there's all the dead models on the right-hand side, but the Rangers do rally. You can see the demi at the bottom of the screen here only has 1 wound remaining. And so yeah, if those 12 Ranger shots, this is my turn 5, so they'll have 1 more turn to shoot at them. So my turn 6, so if I can plink 1 wound off of that demi, then he'll drop the objective and I'll be able to contest, because I'll have my heavy infantry over on the far left who've been sitting on that objective all game, and then his Knightly Orders, which just have 2 models left that also have an objective. So that's the hope there. And the militia move up. I could have flank charged, but again, they're not going to be bringing much in terms of combat res. But my only hope at this point is to kill those Knightly Orders. I don't think I'm going to be able to break him in combat because he's minimized, rerollable, discipline 9. So they actually move up to try to assassinate that wizard because I've got pistols and he's only got a 2-up armor save. So that's what they're doing there. And in my magic phase, I get Altered Sight off. Again, he's not letting me... I should say it's not even his fault. I didn't take very good buff spells, right? I've just got Glory of Gold, which he's shutting down now. So I've got Altered Sight to give them +1 to hit, but there's really just not that many guys left to hit with. I do 1 wound with pistols in the shooting phase to his wizard. So not enough, but it's something. And then you can see here in combat, I've got, 3 Imperial Guard left and a bunch of damaged characters. And yeah, it looks like this is the turn where I end up breaking and running. I don't know why I took that picture there first, but that's what happens. They break and run. He runs me down, so I lose the Imperial Guard, all 3 of my characters. And yeah, that's where things sit there. Oh, too far. So, yeah, now guys, we're into my turn 6. That was his turn 6, actually. So this is the end of my turn 5. I skip all of his turn 6, and he kills them off at the end of his turn 6. And then he faces me like this. So he's got 4 Electoral Cav left. He's got 2 Knightly Orders left. And he's got 1 Demi-Griffin. He's got his 2 characters and his, I guess his wizard as well. So all of his characters, he's got a ton of points still on the table, but just in like 10 models or something like that. So in my last shooting phase, my goal is to kill off the 2 knightly orders with pistols and to kill off that 1 demigriff. There's 1 wound left with the rangers. And all I have to do is 1 of the 2, and then I can contest objective, and then it'll be a 16-4, but I'm not able to do either. So it ends up being a 19-1 loss to me. So it was a hard-fought game. As I said, it was my 1 red matchup. I did not want this game, but still very enjoyable. As I said, Full Carl's a fantastic opponent, very skilled, but also very helpful and courteous throughout the game at reminding people of kind of rules, nuances. So yeah, again, a fantastic event. I was very happy to have been able to participate in this one. And my team came in 2nd place overall out of 4 teams with, I think top team got 100 victory point or battle points. And then we ended up with 82 total over the course of the 3 games. So I was grateful for that too, that there was no chance I was ever going to be able to 20 this list. So even if I'd been able to pull off kind of the 10-10 that I hoped for in this game, it still wouldn't have shifted our position up to 1st place. So unfortunate to end the event on a 1, but as I said, it was a very enjoyable game and a great event overall. So thank you so much for watching. Happy gaming, everybody.